Okay, so I'm going to be going over topic 13 for the midterm, which is graphing log and e functions. So to graph, you should know some properties of logarithms first. So the first is log base b of x equals y is interchangeable with b to the power of y equals x. The second property you should know is that log of x has a base of 10, but it's just known that it has a base of 10, and you don't write it. And this is the same as log base of e of x. Log base e of x is the same thing as the natural log of x. It's just assumed and known that it has a base of e. And the third property is that logs are not defined for negative x values. So to graph, I use the function f of x equals 10 to the power of x, and I chose simple x values to get a nice even graph, and I got the y values. I just plugged in the x values to this equation, and I got 1/100th, 1/10th, 1/10, and 100, and I use those as the ordered pairs for the points on the graph. So to analyze any graph and to analyze log function graphs, you should know the asymptote and the domain and range of the graphs. So if you don't know what an asymptote is, it's just a line that the points on the graphs near but never reach. And so example of an asymptote on this graph is y equals 0. The x values could go on infinitely in the negative direction, and the y values would never reach 0. So that's the example of an asymptote. And the domain and range, if you don't know, are the restrictions for the x and y values. So the domain for this graph is all real numbers, because the values can go on infinitely in the positive and negative direction. So all real numbers could be x values, but this is not the same for the range. There is a restriction on the range, and this is because of the asymptote. The y values can never reach negative numbers, so we would say that the range is y is greater than 0. So to further analyze these graphs, we can look at the transformations. So there are three kinds of transformations: the translation, stretch or compression, and the reflection. So the translation is just a shift of the graph up, down, left, or right. A stretch or compression is a stretch or compression of the shape of the graph and how steep or shallow the curve is. And reflection is whether it's reflected over the x or the y axis. And you can find the translation because the numbers are added or subtracted values, and the stretch or the compression are multiplied values, and the reflection you can tell by whether it's positive or negative. So I used the example of page 106, number 10, to show this. So it's asking to match each equation to its corresponding graph. So you have these equations and these graphs, and you have to tell which match based off of the translations. So I already have the answers written down just because it's easier to show if they're already there, and there are more problems like this in the book for you to look at if you need more help. So I'll just go over a few. So for A, we know that it's C because e of x is just a natural log, and you can see that it would be, except because this is negative, it flips over the x-axis and it slopes the opposite way. And this is the same for equation E. It's you can tell that it is a natural log. It has a asymptote of y equals 0, and it crosses the y-axis at 1, negative 1 or positive 1. But because there's a minus sign here, it is flipped over the x-axis, and because of the minus sign over the x, it's flipped over the y-axis. So that's just a overview of graphing log and e functions, and I hope that helped for the midterm.